All right. Well, welcome everyone to our hospice panel. This is a really important conversation, and I am so excited to be having this conversation with these four people, which I know excited even sounds like a strange word, but I know you guys will all appreciate it because each of these individuals just brings so much to the table and has such a depth of knowledge around this subject in particular. So I'm going to go around and let them introduce themselves, but we're just really honored to be with you all this morning and just having this really important discussion. And we're looking forward to talking about things that are hard, but also in a way that hopefully prepares you and your family, or maybe you're someone who just knows someone that wants to support them well and is looking for tips and advice, maybe even on how to be a good friend or be a good support system. And so we're just going to tackle a bunch of questions that can be a little bit challenging, but I think this group here is the one for the job. So Kaya, why don't we start with you? And then in my circle, it goes Kaya, Michael, Daniel, Aaron. So okay, perfect. So let's go in that order, and we'll just go around and introduce ourselves.
Wonderful. Thank you, Heidi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kaya Aun, and I'm a clinical manager with Trinity Care with the hospice and palliative care. And I've worked in the field for over 10 years now, both with the pediatric side and with the adult side. And I originally started being out in the field. My background, my clinical skill is social work. And so I did that out in the field for several years and then transitioned more into management. And I really love right now being able to balance management and then also being able to go out for those really tender visits. It's something that I hold really dear to my heart and will not let go of. So I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks, Kai. I'm Michael Barnett. Thrilled to be here. And I am a med-peds physician down here in Alabama. I'm at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. So I also work with adults and with kids, so across the age spectrum. And I do all hospice and palliative care. So primarily a palliative care doc inpatient, but also do home visits and work with families in homes. And my particular interest is in training physicians how to have hard conversations. And so how do we talk about serious things, but in a way that is filled with grace and compassion. And so teaching physicians how to be human again as we have these hard conversations with patients and families.
Yeah.
My name is Daniel Harrell. I'm a longtime pastor, part-time psychologist, and magazine editor, and now a hospice chaplain. I'm connected with Inheritance of Hope through one of their legacy retreats. My wife died of pancreas cancer 2.5 years ago. We had a poor hospice experience, unfortunately, which sort of propelled me into getting involved afterwards as a volunteer and now as a part-time chaplain.
Well, thanks, Daniel. So my name is Erin Rafter. I am in Ohio, and I work with an organization called The Gathering Place. I'm a licensed psychologist and a child life specialist, and I oversee our children and family programs. We are a support center for those touched by cancer. And so working with not only with families currently dealing with cancer, not only adult cancer, but pediatric cancer, but then also families who have experienced a loss and kind of helping with that transition between both of those worlds and supporting the family through that process about those tough conversations, but also really just focusing on coping and how do people cope with those different types of challenges.
Great. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, you can see here, there is just a wide breadth of knowledge here. And I don't think I realized that all of you really do speak to the child and adult side of things, which I think is really unique because we know as professionals that really when someone gets a life-altering diagnosis, as many of our families have, that it really is not just the one person who experiences it. It is the entirety of the family that feels it. And so I love that you can even speak to some of just the developmental pieces that go along with, what children experience when their parent has a diagnosis, like many of our families do. So, all right, let's start. Maybe someone can just kind of kick us off by just talking about, like, what is hospice? It really does seem kind of like a very scary, like overwhelming word that when people hear it, they go, "Ooh, not that word." So talk us through what it is.
I
Hi,
can give
I should do
a
that.
little start, and I want people to join in, because I think one of the amazing things about hospice is that we're all going to see it through a slightly different lens. And I think one thing, this actually came up today. I was in the hospital and I was working with a med student who's on an elective with us. And in the hallway, we were leaving a patient's room, and she said, everyone thinks that hospice and palliative care is all doom and gloom. And she's like, I've been on service with you for 2 days, and it is so the opposite. And I think what she was impressed with is that it's about living life to the fullest. And right in the midst of something really terrible, potentially, and sad and all of that, but recognizing that how do we make the most of the time that we have? And how do we make home work? And how do we get the right supports in place, the right team in place to really take care of patient and family, right? With a focus on quality and a focus on comfort and a focus on the things that matter most to that family, to that patient, and to that family. So I'm eager to hear what other folks add to that.
Yeah, it's all of that, right? And what I think is so special about it is in those conversations about what's really important, the family gets the opportunity to really see what they want to do with this time that remains, and what really is important to them in the midst of all of the chaos and heartache and all of the whirl of emotions that every individual family member goes through. That these really meaningful conversations are happening so that everybody can come together and find this anchor in a way and say, like, okay, all of this is happening, and what is really important to us to focus on right now in this moment. It's like really grounding.
And probably the only thing that I would add to that is that it doesn't stop after the loved one dies, but that hospice continues with bereavement and grief care.
I've always tried to frame it with families that it's really a shift in focus from quantity of life to then really focusing on quality of life. And it just kind of changes that. I think there's that kind of perpetual energy when you're in the middle of treatment, to kind of slow that down a little bit. And then really just, I like that idea of really just focusing on living at that point, and how can the family come together to really prioritize at that time what they want to focus on.
Yeah, that's so good, because intentional living is very much what we're about. I would say, like, even Inheritance of Hope kind of gets that bad rap, if you will, of saying, like, I'm not going to go to something where they talk about, like, dying, or I don't want to sit around and talk about, like, what it's going to be like. And they come to find out, like, we're about intentionally living. And so I love the shift in that. I wish these conversations happen more frequently so we could gear people in that direction. And
I'll say, I think sometimes it gets such a bad rap because the conversations get delayed, because people are afraid of hospice. And so it gets pushed off till then. At the point, it can be very quick. And so that's why I think sometimes it gets such an association with, well, hospice equals death. Whereas if people are more comfortable having that conversation sooner, it really opens the door then for that opportunity for it to be a supportive experience. So I hope that people can get to the point where they can have that conversation sooner and be open to the idea of having that conversation sooner. So
yeah, let's go there. So why would a family want to sign on to hospice? It is something that you sign on to, right? So what are the benefits of doing such a thing?
well, I can say, at least from our perspective, it can open the door then to some other services. It can open the door to really having that conversation then about where are those services going to happen, and what's available to them, and what that can look like. So there can be more control in that sense, and really kind of talking about options at that point.
So like what types of services? So for like the family member back home who's furiously writing right now, they're like what?
Well, I mean, I think I can speak from kind of the medical side, right? That one of the things that I know when I'm talking to families about hospice, that one of the big challenges of dealing with a serious illness and is how fragmented our healthcare system is, and how challenging it is sometimes to get the help that you need. Like, who do I call? And it's just this, it's this awful experience of leaving messages on voice lines and trying to get a nurse to call back. And I think one of the most amazing things is, right, having this nurse who is a point person for your family that's coming out to the house to check in and has direct access to a physician 24/7, like truly being able to get help when you need it most. And so when I explain that to families, that you're going to have a phone number that you can call 24/7, and I mean it, like if it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you're not sure what to do, you're going to be able to call, and folks are going to help you know what to do, or even send someone out to the house in the middle of the night. And their ability, my ability to connect, to stay connected with a family is there's no other a model of care like what hospice provides.
Yeah, and for example, even when symptoms come up overnight, instead of having to take their loved one to the emergency room and then be admitted for a quick treatment just to have that 1 or 2 symptom managed, now they get to have all of those symptoms managed at home. And so the back and forth between the hospitalizations and the emergency room visits, it can be very exhausting. It can be very tiresome. It can be very straining on the family, especially all of the different dynamics of who's living in the household and how that kind of detours things for that day, that night, whatever it may be. And so really, as Michael was saying, having that 24-hour care, having direct access to say, these are my symptoms that I'm experiencing. And then either a nurse can come out, or they can be in direct conversation with the doctor to try to see what meds are needed or what other things can be intervened on to manage those symptoms, has been really, really helpful and beneficial for the family, and especially for the patient.
And then what about you, your role, Kaya, is just like a social worker? Like what types of services are you providing the family?
Sure. So one of the things, even like a little bit prior to them signing on, is all about choices, right? So many people are presented with, this is the doctor's plan, right? This is your care plan that we have for you. And not a lot of people sit back and say, do I have other options? What if we went with a different plan? Can I take pieces of that plan that might work for us and then fill it in with other pieces? And so really a social worker helps to advocate alongside with the family and say, are you clearly understanding the information that's being said to you? Are you comfortable with this? Have you thought about other things? Is this a good fit for you and your family right now? And then really then hospice or palliative care, when they come onto service, the role of the social worker is really all of the psychosocial support, helping not only the patient, but all of the loved ones in the families. It really extends really far out. And so a lot of it is spent one-on-one with each of them. Some of them is spent just with the siblings, or just with the couple, or with the whole family, to help facilitate those really hard conversations, right? Because each family member is feeling these feelings, and they are all having really big worries and really big things that they're wanting to say and communicate, but helping to facilitate those conversations in a safe space that's really facilitated by somebody who can help provide each individual support during that process is really moving and special. And then there's also the logistics side of helping them plan out all of their mortuary arrangements and things like that, so that it's a very smooth process afterwards. And then helping them transition to the bereavement to be able to provide that support.
And Daniel, can you speak to, you mentioned briefly, like your hospice experience was not good. So do you mind sharing with us just even a little bit about, you know, what that looked like for you and the services maybe that lacked that you wished had existed?
Yeah, so maybe I want to be careful not to have my experience dissuade people from hospice, because I think it was just a misstep that doesn't represent hospice as a whole. When our oncologist told us that, you know, chemotherapy was no longer really working and recommended comfort, and we acceded. I mean, one of the things that's beautiful about hospice is that the focus shifts, and suddenly, you know, all of the work and effort that has gone into cure now moves into comfort. And I would add that what comfort does is make space for conversation and reconciliation. And, you know, the beauty of hospice is that it truly is this lovely collaboration between family and patient, nurse, social worker, chaplain, in a ongoing conversation for the good of the family. You know, on the one hand, you know, part of being human is to die. And, you know, what hospice does is place all that reality and that honesty on the table so that we can die well. And I would say that for my wife, Dawn, she had a beautiful death. The misstep was really just a bad fit with a particular person who was assigned to us, and just the resistance that the person kind of pushed when we objected to the assignment. To the hospice organization's credit, they apologized profusely after, but it did create a bit of upset kind of in the beginning that took a little time to recover, and unfortunately we didn't have a ton of time. But that said, the triage nurses that were completely accessible, as Michael said, and then the just off the charts bereavement support and grief counselor I had on the backside more than made up. And again, we're all humans, and so these mistakes are made, and hospice workers it's a hard job on the one hand, but a really beautiful and honoring job on the other. So I think, you know, what I would say to our families here is that, as beautiful as hospice is, if you're in a space where something's not working, say it, because, you know, hospice is all about you having what you need when you need it. And so to not speak that need is not necessary, because they are capable and able and equipped and financed to do it. So don't hesitate to speak if you're not getting what you need.
That's really helpful, for sure. Thank you. Okay, so a family decides they would like to do hospice, and correct me if I'm wrong, this means they stop treatment, correct?
Curative treatment.
So any treatment towards cure, I think, because I think that's also one of the things. It's like, okay, well, that means we're not getting anything.
Yes.
You're not treating to cure anymore, but it can still be for comfort. And I think that's where sometimes also people get confused, is that there's still medicine, there's still all of that stuff. And so it isn't just a cutting off of everything. It's now just a different focus.
I think that's a really important distinction kind of medically. And I think one that we're seeing more and more as we're, you know, medicine just keeps advancing and we keep coming up with new things. And you'll sometimes hear medical people talk about the palliative intent of a medicine, or they'll say that this is palliative chemo or palliative radiation or something like that. And sometimes, to me, one of the things that I love about hospice, about this work, is there's a creativity in it of sort of every case is different, and sitting down together and figuring out, is this medicine helping or not? Because it's really, that's the question, right? Is it helping us to be more comfortable, to have quality time, or is it keeping me stuck in a hospital away from my family? Is it making me feel worse, sicker? And so it's really thinking about, what are the things, let's continue the things that are helping, and let's start to peel back the things that aren't helping. And so it's really getting away from that all or nothing, stop everything mentality.
And that is the picture that you painted prior, Michael, about hospice really being the ones and palliative that can really see the whole picture of all of the specialists. And that's when that becomes so important, because they are the ones that look at all of those treatments and say, what about this one? And question each one, instead of the specialists kind of being more siloed a lot of times and just saying, this is your treatment for this. And then the next specialist has a treatment for this. And they're not really communicating as much as patients think they are, unfortunately. And also, one of the things, to Erin's point, hospice liaisons, most hospice organizations have hospice liaisons that will come out to the hospital or come out into the home. And so they can really go over in detail. You will still be able to have this. You will still get this. Oh, but this one, this is not covered under hospice, because as Michael was saying, every patient is so different and every situation is so unique. And so really, I would encourage people to ask for the hospice liaison to come out and really go over in detail so that they have that informed decision prior to deciding whether hospice is the right fit for them or not.
So good. Okay, maybe Erin, you could speak to this first, and everyone else kind of filter in the gaps. But how do you prepare your children for a parent going on to hospice? Do you say those words? Do you use concrete details? Talk us through, just even short developmentally, like what would be appropriate for inviting your kids into that conversation. And then for sure, Daniel, talk to me about Violet's experience, perhaps, if you feel comfortable with that. And yeah, just let's talk through that. What about the kids?
Sure. So hopefully, I apologize, my neighbor has decided to mow their lawn.
Well,
So
it would be fitting.
So when it comes to kids, I think this is one of those things that parents dread the most is, how do we have this conversation? And a lot of times I talk with the parents, and I think all of us can, that you kind of start at, well, okay, how old are my kids? Because it's not even, and just what do they understand? Because one 5-year-old can have a very different developmental level than another 5-year-old. So it's more, where are they at? Parents know their kids, and they also know, there's so many factors that come into it. What are the family's beliefs? What's the family's culture? Who's involved in the care of the kids? Because I think the biggest factor is whatever the parents decide that they're going to share with their kids and how they're going to share it. You want to make sure that all the adults who are involved in that child's care are all on the same page, so that kids aren't hearing different information, because a lot of times it's those mixed messages or those types of things that can create more anxiety or worry or concern. So a lot of times I tell parents, well, first, you want to be in the space to know kind of what you're sharing, what you understand, what you think your kids can understand, and then get the adults on the same page. Then you can have that conversation. That also can include teachers, just that whoever's going to be surrounding those kids. And then from there, okay, well, what do the parents know? What is the treatment plan? What is that basic information? Because speaking in generalities, speaking in euphemisms, like those types of things, again, kids, they know, like they have a sense of when you're being honest with them or when you're not. And the older they are, the more access they have to stuff. And so, if you want to be the front line to be sharing with them what's going on, you don't want them hearing from somebody else. You want to try to keep that from happening as much as possible. one thing I'll say to parents is like, I understand wanting to protect your kids. The problem is that kids are ninjas, and you may think you're having a private conversation and they may not hear you when you are telling them to go clean the room or go to the homework or that type of thing. But the second you think you're having a private conversation, that's when they hear you. So be honest and be upfront, because that is going to make things move easier going forward. When it comes to those hard conversations, then, it's a lot of times the question the parents dread is, are you going to die? And I think once hospice has started, or you're considering that, then obviously it's a real fear, and you're moving in that direction. But it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen tomorrow, unless you're aware that it's going to happen in a really short amount of time. So that's why I always come back to, what do you know? Because that's where you start as far as what you're going to talk to your kids about. If you're starting the hospice process more kind of early, then the younger the kids are, the more kind of day-to-day you want to be with them, right? Because they live in the moment. And if it's okay, well, there's going to be a hospital bed moving in, or, what are the practical things? And start with that first. There's going to be people coming into the house, and this is what their job is. And being able to be concrete with the younger ones, and with the older ones, being able to have some of those more deeper conversations, or if it's really hard for you as the parent to have those conversations, but this is information that the kids need to know, you can pull in other people too. There are hospice staff who are there to help with this. There could be other family members who are trusted, and who, because they're maybe one step removed from it, can have those conversations, and you can trust them to have, or at least be there when you're having those conversations. So if it's too hard for you to say the words, there can be somebody else who can say that. And then that way, you're kind of building that support system around the kids. The other thing that we definitely see very frequently, and you guys may have also seen this, is that kids, just as much as parents want to protect the kids want to protect their parents too. So they may have questions that they want to ask, but they don't want to ask their parents because, well, I don't want to make them sad, or I don't want to make them upset, or I don't want to make them mad. Not that the parents are going to get mad, but they're kids. So it can also be making sure, okay, do we have other adults that they could ask? And letting them know that, and say, you know what, if you have questions, but maybe you don't want to ask me, you can ask Aunt so-and-so, you can ask this person. When Miss Social Worker comes to the house, you're allowed, you can ask them those questions, and giving them permission. So it's not taboo. It's not something that seems like it's off limits, that there's an open door. They may not walk through that door at that moment, but it does not mean that they aren't going to have those questions. Also, when you share that information,
sure.
Exactly. You want to give them permission, because initially they may not have those questions, but when they go to bed at night, or a week later, or that some of those things might come up.
Sure.
You can keep checking in with them, but also having other people who are checking in with them as well.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I think all that is true. It's a lot. So going back to knowing your kid, just being honest, and maybe all that I would add is, it's just so overwhelming for the caregiver and the surviving parent that there has to be, I think, some attention given to that self-care, whatever that looks like for you. There was a moment the last week that my wife was alive when she was still in a weakened state, trying to correct our daughter, and stopped herself and just made this motion, kind of handed everything to me. And, it was just this moment of being overwhelmed, which, continues. I would say that's really been the hardest. Adjustment is not, well, it's all hard. So let me not say that, but I mean, the loss was hard, but the continuation as a solo parent is rough. And I think that has to, the thing that hospice gives you is a kind of on-ramp to the rest of your life. And so the resources that are in place, and again, as everyone has said, so amply available in ways they're not going to be 13 months after hospice, is to take advantage of those and recognize that you need help and let that help be provided.
Mm-hmm.
So good. Were you going to say something, Kaya?
Yeah, a lot of times the clinicians and myself, we like to use the I wish, I worry, and I wonder. It's something that we use in most difficult conversations, and I find myself using it all the time with kiddos. When they are expressing something, I say, I wish that I could guarantee that your parent would be here until Christmas. And I worry that we won't have that much time. I wonder how we can make today special.
That's really good. That yeah, I'm going to steal that one. That's a really practical, a practical step. Yeah, thank you. Okay, did you have anything else, Michael? Sorry, I didn't mean to move on.
I think what everybody else has said, that I would just add to it is just that, I mean, the beauty of hospice and even grief work itself is this focus on today. And I mean, and that's, all we're ever given anyway. But I think to see that as a gift and make it each day count really brings a lot of power, because I can do today, and
yeah, that's good. Okay, let's kind of walk down this path of your family has now entered hospice, and that is definitely the feeling I'm getting. It is like a family experience, or at least that is the goal. And if it's not, then we know that we can ask for the right people to help that be the goal. And it is nearing the end. What can a family member expect? What does it look like when the person actually passes? Who comes to the house? What kinds of things, even as a family signing on to hospice, I'm just curious, what do they even know to ask about when the worst case that they can imagine actually does happen? So maybe we can just kind of walk through that tricky part.
I can speak to sort of the physical changes and sort of the signs or the things, because one thing that's kind of interesting is, regardless of sort of what brings us to this path, the underlying diagnosis and what we've been struggling with, it's, for many of us, the end looks really similar. And I think one of the things that is helpful about hospice, and one of the things that causes, I see a lot of anxiety about, is just simply wondering what it will look like what will happen. And actually having someone who's walked that road before, that can walk it with me now and can explain what's happening physically with the body, or why this person is withdrawing or kind of acting differently, or the physical signs that they're seeing, and just being able to ask questions. I think this is actually a place where kids are can actually teach us something, because kids often approach it with such sort of awe and curiosity, and ask really just real questions about how things are changing and what they look like. And we're the ones that have all the baggage on top and don't know how to ask it the right way, and worry what people will think if I ask it that way. But walking through, you know, those last few weeks or those last few days or even those last few hours of physically what it's looking like, I think that's something that hospice will be able to help, and that can be a huge thing for families.
Yeah.
And so ideally when they first sign on to service, and you know, hospice is all about meeting you where you are. So if these conversations don't happen right when they're on service, it's really because the family is just not ready to have the conversations. And they do really open the door, but they are not going to say, we need to make these decisions right now until it comes to a very dire point when you really have to make the decision. And so as early as possible, all of these simple arrangements, such as the mortuary selection, things like that, really the hospice agency tries to get ahead of time, because the thought, right, is that let's make these decisions when it's not a reality and happening right now. We want it to be a not emotional like reaction or choice. We want it to be something that's thought out, intentional, and that you're happy with. And so let's think about those things prior to. And so what the family will feel as the patient begins to be more symptomatic and they're seeing, obviously, as Michael was saying, like the physiological changes that are occurring, is they might be experiencing more nursing visits happening in the home. So more frequent nursing and maybe more doctor check-ins or provider, nurse practitioner, or doctor check-ins with the patient. They might also be seeing at the very, very end in the last few days that a nurse is staying around the clock. A lot of people refer to it in hospice agencies as crisis scheduling. And so it's a nurse there who's with the family the entire time, so that as symptoms change, because a lot of times they can go from very manageable to not manageable very quickly. So they like to have a nurse in the home who can really help to administer some of the meds and to help keep them very comfortable and to try to keep peace in the room. A lot of the families want a chaplain there. And so a chaplain will be with them for the last 1 or 2 days or be on call. And it's really a tailored experience for each family. A lot of families say, we don't want anybody in the home. And the families have what we call a comfort kit. And so there's certain meds in there that are really important for pain and symptom management and end of life care. And so they can administer those meds themselves if that's something that they feel comfortable with. And a lot of times they do. And then other times they don't and they want a nurse to. And both are equally great options. And so for the families who aren't wanting really hospice to be involved in those last few days, then when their loved one does die, then they would just call the hospice agency, and the hospice agency will always offer a visit. It can always be declined. And they'll offer a visit also if you want the chaplain to come out, or do you want the social worker or the nurse, whoever the family finds most comforting. And again, it could be nobody. And then the hospice agency themselves will reach out to the mortuary and help wrap up all of those final arrangements.
Daniel, I'm curious, do you find that your role has been mostly pre the parents passing or the loved ones passing, or do you find your role still carrying on very much after the passing?
Really depends on the relationship, and there are rules and regulations in place as regarding how hospice can work and interact, and so it depends. But I think that one of the things hospice does try to check on is, what is your greater support system looking like? And, you know, as chaplains, we'll get assessments around bereavement and who needs what, and faith communities, and so, you know, there's a deep awareness of the importance of extended communities. And, you know, as Kaya mentioned, a lot of prior conversations so that all the decisions are made. And, you know, and I think when the death occurs, it's not like you haven't, I mean, nothing's a surprise at this point. So you're prepared, and you're kind of free to be sad and say goodbye without all of the, the awfulness that comes with being in a hospital and things being in disarray. I mean, for us, it was, candles and family and music and holding hands and watching the last breath and being with Dawn until, the funeral home came and took her away, and then, support after. So, I mean, all that worked just like it was supposed to. And like they said it would. I did have to administer some medication at the end, but the nurse walked me through that. And so there was not a sense of concern or worry about doing that. And, so the hand holding is both necessary and welcome and available, because this isn't the hardest thing you'll have to do.
And in your experience, you guys, do you feel like it is a moment? I've heard so much this entire conversation. It's like, it's what the family wants. It's the family's choice. And there is just this very much seems to be this sense of there are many, many choices in a world that up until this point, everything's been dictated for you. So I am curious, just even as I'm asking it, I'm thinking, I know what you're going to say, but do you invite your children into that space? I imagine it will change based on like the kids, but maybe there's a family that just needs to hear like, it is okay to have your kids present, or it's okay to not have your kids present if that is better for them. What has been your experience so far in having the children present at the parents' passing?
Well, my kid wasn't there, but after Dawn died, we went and woke her up, brought her down, say goodbye. And I think Aaron will just say that the family makes that determination based on knowing the kids, and there's not a wrong thing here.
There's
and chances are you would have had a chance to talk about it prior.
yes,
right.
I think the big thing is and again, middle to older kids, even some of the younger kids, if you're able to have that conversation ahead of time and give them some options, and that also carries over to funeral and that piece as well. But at the time of passing, and sometimes you don't have an option. I know I've worked with families before that they've had those conversations and they try their best, but a child might be at school or sleeping or, those types of things. But I think even just being able to have that conversation ahead of time to give some choices. The times I've seen there be difficulties was if there wasn't a choice given, and especially for older kids or teens, if they didn't feel like they even had a choice, the choice was made for them, that there was frustration afterwards. So I think just being able to have that conversation ahead of time, prefacing it with, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if, we'll be able to do this, but if you have a choice, what might you want to do? Yeah. And they may change their mind, and that's okay. But, I think it's just being able to facilitate that conversation with them.
I think, bouncing off that, Aaron, I think one thing that I've seen is that idea of giving space and letting kids, and often they will be honest, they will say what they're comfortable doing and what they're able to do. Obviously we are a culture that is not very comfortable with death. And unfortunately, most of us haven't had someone die in our home. If we went back 100 years, that was a very different experience. Obviously, we've all had to deal with death in the last year and a half, more so than many of us ever have. But I think one of the things that also I appreciate my hospice colleagues is just their familiarity and sort of willingness to sit in that space. And it's okay. Like, it's a part of life. Like, it is, we are all going to go through that. And And that comes down even to sort of physically being with someone in their body when they die. And this is a hard thing to sort of talk about, but I've seen really beautiful moments of being able to show people how to say goodbye and to touch. And for some of us, that is a really important moment to feel the difference between what was once living and here and it is now gone. And so, my hospice colleagues that are able to role model that for families in a loving, gentle way, and both for the adults and kids, sort of show that it's okay to be in that.
Okay. There was like this brief touch on engaging a larger support network. And we know like Inheritance of Hope is a larger support network. We might not be physically present to be able to be with many of our people, but through our Hope at Home groups and ongoing things like, this, our annual legacy event, we're able to kind of connect with families. But what types of just practical tips would you give families to engage a larger community? There might have been people who rushed in at the beginning and who have since kind of like dwindled off, but now they're entering a new season. And what types of things would you encourage them to ask for, practically, emotionally, spiritually, all those things? What types of things should families be asking others for in this season?
Sure. I think
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Daniel.
No, I was just going to start by saying, everybody moves forward faster than you do. And so there's kind of that acknowledgement. But I again, can't speak highly enough of taking advantage of the grief support that hospice will provide for 13 months after. Grief groups, things that you guys offer, Heidi. All of that sort of solidarity with others is so important. The first year, all of the firsts that are going to happen. Again, and it's probably important to say, we all grieve differently. The important thing is to grieve, and not to squelch that. So whatever that looks like for you, again, there's not a wrong way to do that. For me, it was, and for my daughter, it was keeping things the same. That was very important for us. But for others, it might be not. And again, not a wrong way to do it, just so you don't deny it. And I think, friends are going to, say stupid things. They're going to say the wrong thing. And that's fine. Is, what you don't want them is to go away. You want them to be nearby. So I think you have to just be welcoming of all the efforts that people are going to make. And some are going to hit right, some aren't. And, yeah. I got more to say, but I'll start with that.
That's such a beautiful space to start, Daniel. And that mirrors what I was going to say, is really that checking in with yourself first to see what is it that you need, right? I think that society, friends, family, all well-intended, have really big ideas about what we need and when we need it, especially during these times. And because it is such a personal experience, and grief is so personal and different and profound for every person that has to continue to move through it, that really being able to sit and spend time with yourself and figure out what it is that you need and then ask for it. And a lot of the pressures to feel okay and try to remain some sort of, as Daniel was saying, like normalcy, or to feel okay. And it can build so much more pressure for somebody. And to realize that it's okay if you don't feel okay. And it's okay to reach out to people and say, I don't feel okay. And no, I don't feel good about this, instead of, the superficial, like, I'm doing okay. Right. Because we think that that's what people who are around us want to hear. but really people really want to hear, and they can help when they're here, how we're actually feeling and how we can be helped.
Mhm.
And I will definitely piggyback on that. Yeah, that idea of in our grief groups and things, we hear so often that there's places that people feel like they have to put on that mask of I'm okay, and sometimes they're doing that for themselves too. Like at work, I've got to be okay, but that it makes such a difference when they have their just core group that they can take the mask off, and it's just the hard part of grief and the ugly crying and like all of that, because that's part of this too. And the thing that always fascinates me about grief is that it's such a universal experience, and yet we don't necessarily just inherently know how to do it. So it's okay to give yourself permission to not know how to do this. And I think especially for parents, not just that anticipatory grief, so that kind of that grief and that loss that happens before the death, but then also after that, you're grieving too. And so when it comes to taking care of your kids, there's going to be times that you can't do everything and you need to call in that backup, and you're allowed to do that. And so that's where I think having that support system can be so key, just because sometimes you got to tap out, and somebody else can step in so that you can have your time to grieve too. And being able to do that allows you then to continue to move forward, even though it might be really small steps. And that's you're allowed to do that. I think as far as calling in that support system, there's people who will ask, what can I do? And at that moment you might not have anything. And so sometimes with our groups, we're even talking with people about like, okay, so not in the moment where you're on the spot, but have a list. Like and yeah, you talked about keeping things normal, for your daughter. The normalcy, and somebody might help by be able to take them to soccer practice because you just can't do it that night. It's sometimes it's those little things that can make a huge difference. And you can ask for that, and so it's sometimes just having that list so that when somebody offers, you have something practical to say, and not just I'm fine, it's okay, thank you, because you're swimming in it too. So you're not always going to have the answers, you're not always going to be able to do it or go pick up the milk, but somebody would be very happy to go get the milk for you. So it's sometimes those little things that can really be big, and you're allowed to ask for help with that. So
Good. Well, I want to keep an eye on the time and be mindful of you guys, but I would love to just kind of open it up one last time for any closing thoughts or encouragements or nuggets of wisdom that you have to share with our families today who are, could be watching this for a friend or could be watching it for themselves. Maybe they're the diagnosed parent, or maybe they're the caregiver. Everyone's coming at it from a different angle, but I would love to just open it up one more time for any last thoughts.
well, I don't know if I'd call it a nugget of wisdom, but one thing that comes up so frequently in our groups is just permission to give yourself grace. Grace through all of this. There's going to be missteps, there's going to be misspeaking on things, but I think everybody is, just you're trying, and you are, if it's coming from a place of good intention, you can give yourself grace, try to give people around you grace, your kids grace. I mean, it's just taking that breath for a minute and just knowing, okay, we're trying our best. And today might not have been a great day, but we're trying our best in a really, really difficult situation.
Yeah, it's awful. And, I think that the thing that, families need to hear is that, when we talk about the beauty and power of hospice, it's in the midst of the worst thing we would ever want.
Yeah.
And so, this is where, love and grace and beauty is at its most profound. And, to resist those things just makes the awful worse. So I think you have to recognize that, however the saying goes, when you're broken, that's when the light gets in, and you've just got to let that happen. And hospice are not only individuals who are called and passionate about being that light, but equipped and able, to help, but they're not going to force themselves. And this is where I think there has to be a receptivity on our part that, I need help, and to allow ourselves to be helped and carried in that season.
That makes me think of a writer that I appreciate, Henry Nouwen, and he wrote a reflection when his father died, and he talked about that there's great solidarity in this experience because the entire human family will go through this at some point, and so it's a very equalizing thing, and it's very vulnerable and it's very humbling, and sort of the ability to be cared for. This is an opportunity to let other people love you and to help care for you, and that's not easy for a lot of us, and especially in our culture. But the only way, through it is through it. There's no sneaking around this. And so just encouragement that that in some strange way, even us from around the country are with you, that we're all in this together.
Yeah, and as Christians, I mean, we, the Christian faith teaches us that love is the supreme, that death is a supreme kind of love. And that to participate in that is to really experience love at its greatest depth. And it's very powerful.
And I would just say, I mean, I feel like all the wisdom has already been shared, that in those moments when you're not feeling like you can lean on that grace and you can't lean on that prayer, whatever it is that you felt like you could lean on is just not working for you. Maybe it's your breath, right? Maybe it's to just focus on where your feet are. Something so simple as feeling the air push through our lungs can help to ground us, that this is where we're at in this moment. We're not expected to be anywhere else, can really help some people to get through those really gut-wrenching moments. And in those responses, when you're thinking of what can someone do for me to help you feel better, it's okay to just have somebody sit with you and do nothing. And it's okay to have somebody that you call and you don't say a single word to. There are people who want to be there for you and that they would love to be there for you in those ways. So a lot of times people think that it would feel so awkward or it would feel uncomfortable. It only feels uncomfortable or awkward until you do it. And then that's when you find the comfort and the beauty in it on both sides, the person who gets to be there for you and for you being able to have that love upon you.
Yeah, that is actually a really powerful reminder. When my dad passed away almost a year ago, and someone came and sat on my front lawn in a lawn chair with me, and I don't even think we talked. But the gift of presence is truly a gift, and that's what I hear throughout all of your I would say they're all nuggets of wisdom, but all of your wisdom today has been that is very much what hospice is. It is the gift of presence, and it's saying we're here and we're here for you in whatever way you need us to be, and you have choices, and we're here for each member of your family. And so I think it is just such an important conversation, and I really do thank you all for helping us kind of navigate this today, because I really hope that some of our families, I hope that you guys we're able to just like take some of this in and say, I learned something new about hospice. I didn't recognize the gift that it could be for my family. And I know that all of these people here are cheering you on. And I really appreciate that Michael even said that. Like, even here across the nation, you have 4 strangers who say, like, we're in it with you too. We feel it, and we know that that it is the hardest thing that you will go through, and yet we're standing with you. And we feel that, you know, with Inheritance of Hope, like, we're in it with you. And so I just thank you guys so much for your time and for all you shared with our families today. And that has just been a joy for all of us to partake in. So thank you.